Hey, good day, everyone. It's Alan Shimel, CEO of MediaOps, and welcome to another DevOps.com webinar. Thanks for joining us. Got a really great webinar today on, I think, something that's very important to every organization out here dealing with this new normal, these unusual times resulting in a new normal. Before we jump into that, though, let me just do a quick little bit of housekeeping. On our DevOps.com webinars, we do use the GoToWebinar system, and that means for many of you, you have your GoToWebinar control panel on the top right-hand corner of your screen. And I'm just going to take a moment. There's two specific areas of that control panel I want to bring to your attention. One is marked questions, and if you wouldn't mind just clicking the little arrow or caret so it's downward facing, and you'll see the question section expand. This webinar today is really a very interactive webinar with two great in me, speakers who are going to be participating, and it'll be as good as you make it. So we welcome questions, we welcome your comments, we welcome the participation from the audience, and that question section is the place to do it. You can type your questions in real time. They're queued. We have them. All three of us will be able to see it, and we will try to work them in the natural order of the material we've prepared for you today. And this way you don't have to worry about forgetting it or waiting till the end to ask your questions. Put them in there right when they pop in your mind, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. And if we can't get to all of them, we have a record of them, and we'll try to email you your answers, because it's important. We appreciate you taking your time to spend with us today on this, and it's important that your questions get answered. So please, use the question section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we're happy to answer any thoughts, questions, or respond to comments that you may have. Next, I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom of the control panel, and that's for the area marked chat. And if you don't mind expanding that, here at our DevOps.com webinars, we use the chat section for technical support. So for instance, the audio is a little bit dicey, or I sound like I'm underwater. The video, or we don't really have video today, but the slides, well, we do have video, but the slides are not progressing, or the video freezes, or something's interfering with you getting the most out of this webinar, but you can still get to that chat section. Please reach out to us there. We do have folks standing by. They'll do their best to try to help you so that you get the most out of this webinar session today as you can. So chat is for technical support. Questions are for questions. And I think that does it. Well, let me also answer the usual first question. Yes, this is being recorded. Yes, the slides and recording will be available on demand on DevOps.com, probably within just a couple of hours of us concluding today. So if you need to hop on and off, or you miss a part, or you want to go back, it'll be available there to you. Okay, with that being said, let me introduce you to what we have in store for you today. First of all, today's webinar is brought to us by our friends at JumpCloud, the directory as a service company, and many thanks to them for sponsoring. And today's a bit of a reunion day. I feel like the Beatles getting together here. Let me introduce you to our panel. First of all, I have Rajat Bhargava. Raj is the co-founder, CEO of JumpCloud. And all three of us worked together. Raj was the founder, CEO of a company called Still Secure, which I was involved in, as well as Mitchell Ashley, our other guest. So the three of us have worked together for many, many years. So Raj, first of all, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Alan.
Good, great sound. Good sound check. Secondly, not on your slide, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to pull this all off, but the CEO and founder of Accelerated Strategy Group, Mitchell Ashley, and Mitchell is actually CTO at Still Secure. So Mitchell, welcome and thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm just thinking, Alan, we're a perfect example for anybody starting their career. Don't burn any bridges. That was 20 years ago.
You never know, right? 15, 20 years later. And then, of course, I'm
It's neat,
Alan
and we're also we're still friends, and we talk, and so it's neat. It's neat
and
after all
still
these years.
talking about this kind of stuff, which is,
Yeah.
pretty cool when you think about it. The problems have changed a little bit, but we're still trying to solve them. So in today's webinar is the future of security in a remote world. Let's move along here. Uh-oh. Oh, I think I went maybe a little too far, Raj. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
One back.
Go back one. Yeah.
Yes, one more. Okay, here we go. Today's session. Raj, do you want to grab this one or you want me to do it?
Why don't you go for it, and then I'll just jump in.
Okay. And that's how we're going to do things today. It's an interactive panel. So here's what we're hoping you're going to learn about today. All of us are remote. Almost all of us are remote. And a good percentage of us are going to remain remote. Whenever this new normal kind of equalizes and we reach some sort of equilibrium, depending on who you listen to, 40 to 60% of you will be working remote, at least most of the time, right? What does this mean for productivity and security? They're not, though they are related, they're not inversely proportional, right? Just because we have more security does not necessarily mean you're going to have less productivity, nor does it mean to have higher productivity I need to lower my security, right? And really what we're going to talk about here is, can you have your cake and eat it too, right? Can increased security result in greater productivity? And then what is the future of security in this new normal, right? It's a step function change, right? And we're going to jump into that. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how this all kind of comes together into what the folks at JumpCloud have labeled, and I think it's a great name, the domainless enterprise model, right? So the three of us have grown up and, our careers have been spent in a domain enterprise, right? There was a domain for the enterprise on multiple domains. But we're moving to a world, and this new normal will be domainless. And what does that mean? So that's what we want to cover today. I spoke about, I mentioned this in passing, but Mitchell, Raj, feel free to jump in. What we get past the instant sort of crisis points, if you will, and we get to this new normal. What does it look like working remote versus in the office?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Alan, it's not going to be in office. I think it's going to be much more remote. A vast majority of places are going to be remote. Obviously, there are some jobs that can't be done remote that will have face-to-face. But I think, what we've now learned is there's just going to be too much risk to human life, and we're not going to put people at risk. So that's going to be a big change. I also think that people have learned that there's too much to gain now. So individuals and organizations, I mean, individuals can work from where they want to work. They can be in places that are meaningful to them. And organizations are changing their model. They're basically now focused on, instead of number of hours that you work or being in the office, they're worried about, hey, did we accomplish a goal? Did we achieve an objective? And that is a fundamental difference on how organizations have worked historically. So I just feel like that, plus a global talent pool, I think for knowledge companies, if you will, companies that rely on knowledge workers, I can't imagine that anything goes back to being what it looks like that it has in the past. I don't know what you think, Mitchell, but that's been my viewpoint.
Yeah, there's two sides to the coin. You've got one side. The other side is the employee side. We have some data that says that over 60% of employees that we surveyed said they want to work permanently from home. That was, and you bring up the safety issue. Also, the number one reason why they wanted to work from home is they got all that commute time back. Here in Colorado, it's maybe 20 minutes or something to get to work. But if you're in LA or the Bay Area or London or wherever, we're talking about 2, 3, 4 hours a day. And from a business standpoint, you like that too. You like people getting time back. So there's lots of drivers that are going to keep us, the financial part of buildings and all of it. Certainly, by the way, only 14% of people said they wanted to go back to the office full time. So there's some data to back it exactly what you're saying, Raj.
Yeah, and I think, for our team specifically, we spent a lot of time talking to them. They do appreciate spending time together. And my guess is that you'll have a time where we come together for a short period of time where we meet, we collaborate, maybe we do a social event, whatever it is, and then we go back to working remotely. I think you can have the best of those, both of those things, without sort of mandating that people are in offices. And so once that happens, I think, you know, the genie's out of the bottle on this, and I think it's not going to get put back in.
So I don't disagree per se with anything the both of you said, but I can't be in violent agreement with both of you anyways, just like old times. But, so, you know, yes, the world will be hybrid. It's never black and white. It's always gray. And so you will have people who maybe they'll go in the office a day or two a week. It may be a different day or two that I go in than Mitchell goes in or you go in, Raj. But, you know, I'll go in the office once in a while to get tethered, if you will, right, and anchored in there. But here's the other thing that this is going to wrought, which is there's going to be a new equilibrium that needs to be kind of brought in, which is, Mitch, you brought up the commuting. Yes, I save 2-3 hours a day commuting if I live in Atlanta or Boston or, you know, one of those towns. And I could use those 2 or 3 hours to work more and I'll be more productive. Working that many more hours, I may burn out. I may use some of that time to spend some time with my children and significant other, family, to have more of a work-life balance. I think, especially for people who are not used to working at home from before this, there's going to be an adjustment period of what is that right? You know, we're going to have to turn the dials here. What's the right mix? What's the right mix of how often to come in the office, how many hours a day, how do I when do I turn the clock off, right? And how do I readjust my work-life balance? It affords us tremendous, you know, all three of us have worked with Brad Feld, right, for years, and Brad's been preaching work-life balance for everyone but him, for, you know, for 25 years. But this really affords us the opportunity to dial that in much more than we've ever had. That
I also think, Alan, it's gonna put a much more significant focus from organizations on mental health and wellness for their teams. So that's going to be incumbent upon, you know, not just that individual to go figure it out, but for teams and for people, departments, and HR groups to really learn and educate themselves and teach the rest of the team about these things. Because you're right. I think one of the points you made is super important, which is people are going to have to learn how to work remotely, and that's not generally how things have been done. But you know, people will figure it out. They'll figure it out fast, and you know, and then there'll obviously be second order effects that we'll need to figure out as well on how to solve.
Absolutely. I mean, this is going to change. It's going to change everything, as the slide says here. So
I wanted to hit a couple of things there, Alan, really quickly. If you go back one slide, I think there's a couple of interesting ones for people to think about here. Obviously, social norms are going to change. Work norms are going to change. I think what culture means at an organization is going to be totally different, right? I mean, you know, culture, how you connect with people, how you spend time with them, how do you build relationships? I mean, it's going to be different. It's not going to be the same. I mean, we don't have that water cooler that we can go chat at, or we may not have, you know, kind of a lunch situation or a lunchroom where people can get together. I think there's so many second order, third order effects that are going to have to be figured out that are interesting. And
our timing is interesting too, because you have a workforce beginning to enter the workforce. People, what's current generation? Gen Z, which is, they're very used to working remotely on devices, collaborating with their friends and school workers, and you know, they are digital natives. They're fearless about technology. So in a way, we're kind of creating the environment for them to be very productive in, because they're going to be very comfortable with that remote style work.
All right, so I'll be the contrarian again.
Knew you were gonna.
So, you know, the thing about it though is when you look at something like DevOps, right? It is so dependent on cultural norms and changing the culture of how teams interact, right? And we barely figured that out for when you have people in a common location, right? How did the devs work with the ops folks and the QA and the securities and all of this? We barely figured it out when they're working together. I think it's a lot harder to figure out when they're working remotely. And so it's going to be incumbent, I think, on managers and VPs and, people running organizations to work at, and not just them, the entire organization is going to have to work at making that culture work for you, right? Making sure those lines of communication between the devs, the ops, the security folks, the HR for people, the sales people, that we still have. I mean, I think back to our still secure days. You guys were sitting in an office every Friday afternoon for our exec session in Colorado, and I was often already home in Boca. And it wasn't the same as me sitting at the table with you, right? And it kind of used to bum me out, then you get used to it. So I think people, yes, Raj, you're right, everything will change. I think we're gonna have to work harder at instilling the kind of cultures we want to be successful. And that's really important when we talk about DevOps and DevSecOps and these kinds of things.
Well, I think
go to the next slide.
If I can make your case for you, think about it systemically. Any system that you take how it functions and say majority of it works this way, some of it works this way, let's turn it 180. You try to function with how we work today, doing that, you can do it for a while, but you're going to have to rebuild, reorient the entire system. I'm not speaking just to technology.
Yeah, no, it's like Star Trek going into that mirror universe where Mr. Spock.
You're going to Mr. Spock with his beard. Evil Mr. Spock, but the good Mr. Spock.
Raj, why don't you grab?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we just said it, right? Mitchell, everything's going to change. You did a 180. So why wouldn't IT have to change too, right? Why is it going to be the same? And I think this is an easy one from my perspective where, yeah, everything in IT needs to change too. So we had some fundamental constructs that we have lived with for the last 20, 25 years. One of them is the domain. That's been a core construct. And, there's nobody at the office anymore. There's no people there, there's no resources there, or there shouldn't be. And people will start to move that out. And so this concept of the domain, I think, ends up being sort of obsolete, if you will. I also think that the concept of on-prem services, those are all going to get shifted to the cloud. I mean, we know we've been working on that already. Most people have been shifting to cloud services, lift and shift, whatever you want to call it. That's been going on for years. I think that only accelerates. That makes it all that much more important for us to make it happen at cloud infrastructure providers like AWS or GCP or Azure. They'll benefit from that tremendously. And then obviously we've been talking a lot about the no perimeter, perimeterless security, things like that. But this puts a sort of nail or fine point in that whole issue that there is no perimeter anymore. It's, the perimeter is the person in effect, right? And so I think those assumptions are going to be the new norm for basically all organizations, and it's not going to be business as usual for basically any IT organization.
Before we jump into the technology issues that are outlined here that I want to talk about, I do want to bring up a question from Brandon in our audience, and that is, person's worked remote before and managed remote employees as well. But however, this time was different as everyone was forced to go remote. With that being said, we have a lot of flexibility given the situation because we have kids at home and everything else, everyone's home. But when do you think that flexibility starts to go away? Or as you mentioned, for instance, with mental health taking forefront, does it go away, right? I mean, the idea of being home and it works out because my kids are home and I need to kind of help them with school or whatever. But once we go into this new normal, how much of it is sort of this forced remote versus what is permanent remote, right? How does that play out?
I think Alan and Raj, interested to hear what you both think about this too. It's not like we're set up to go right back to how we worked before, right? We're not down the hall from each other. We're have kids in the middle of things. We're inviting each other into each other's homes. We have the doorbell ring, the person delivering the package. I think what we've introduced is not just flexibility for how we work, but also when we work, because we're interfacing so much more with people in different time zones, different parts of the world, and it's just now it's part. There is no start time for everybody, and well, I think there will be a group of us who will say, I can't adjust to this. And maybe there'll be a rehab center for micromanagers that will go there and kind of get deprogrammed. But I think we'll start to establish new patterns, and it isn't going to go all the way back, because people are not going to give up that flexibility. Maybe they will if they have to get a job, but I think the majority that are finding the parts that they like are going to want to try to keep that. And if we're really working with people, understanding how to help them be productive, you work with what you got. You go to battle with the army you got, right?
Yeah, not the army.
I think. Yeah, I think, at least for us at JumpCloud, we made the decision to let everybody take their choice, be flexible. So that's permanent for us. We made that change. So we still have offices, but if you want to work remotely, you're welcome to work remotely. If you want to come in, you're welcome to come in. Obviously not yet. When their offices it's safe to be open, folks will be able to come in. And then we've left it up to teams to decide how they decide when to get together, whether there's social events, whether there's collaboration events, whether there's, kickoffs or sprint reviews or whatever they might decide to do. So I think it is going to be permanent. I think a lot of this change in flexibility is going to be permanent. I think it's going to be much more about, here's an outcome that we are looking to accomplish as a team or as an individual, and that's the goal. And how you get to that goal will obviously work with you and help you and support you, but we don't have to have that happen from 9 to 5. That can happen in whatever time periods you want. It can happen from whatever location you want. And I think, as it relates to IT, it's going to be, and with whatever tools you want to. So it's going to be, hey, I don't really want a Windows machine. I want a Mac, or I want a certain web application, or I want to work on particular type of hardware, or whatever it may be. I think those choices are all going to be part of this change of, hey, get your job done in whatever way is best for you. Not, we're not going to prescribe that to you.
So let me turn to the technology that's in this, represented sort of in this slide. And again, I'm just going to qualify, I think, what you said there a little bit, Raj. I think from an endpoint usage perspective, yeah, I don't care whether you use a Mac or Windows, an iPad, as long as you get your work done. I think what we need to be careful of, though, is that we don't get into this kind of defund the police, not to get political, but this defund the police kind of mode where, it's laissez-faire and everyone could use whatever the heck they want in terms of applications. In terms of having a corporate culture, in terms of getting things done, whether you're on a Mac or a Windows, I don't care, but we use Gmail for mail, right? And I don't care whether you're getting it through Outlook or a web browser, but we use Gmail for mail. There's a set of apps, and they are in the cloud. They're not on-prem. It's SaaS ops, right? It's SaaS-based apps. But these are the apps that we use and that says a lot about who we are. It helps bind us in a commonality, right? Here at MediaOps, we use Slack and we use the Trello boards and these kinds of things. And our culture is built around those apps. So it's very important.
I think, Alan, go ahead.
No, I agree.
I was going to say, I think there's some principles that absolutely are going to be fundamental. So for instance, like there's no chance that an IT organization is going to be like, well, we really don't care about user access security. We don't care, we're not going to really worry about it. We're not going to lock down devices and make sure they're safe. We can, we don't need VPNs, or we don't need a tunneled connection. It can just be open, clear. We're going to leave it open. Whoever wants to use Salesforce can come in whenever they want. Like none of that's going to happen, right? I mean, we're still going to have some fundamental principles, and I think those principles are going to get more accentuated, and it's going to be what we call sort of domainless enterprise. We'll get to that in a second, but the core part of that is every step of that transaction is going to be secured. It's going to have some thoughts and principles around it. So we're going to make sure that that user is who they say they are. They're working on a system that is safe. They're on a connection that's safe and that can be secured. They have rights to access these things that they're trying to access. They aren't trying to access something that they shouldn't be accessing. I mean, those are all fundamental constructs that are going to be there, regardless of the individual services that are used or platforms that are used.
And I think it's not just the individual rights, it's about the corporate rights, the organizational rights. That data is sacrosanct. That data that data is the crown jewels of this organization. It's the IP, it's the core of what we are, and that has to be secured. No matter what you're doing and how you're doing it, the organization has the right to secure its data, and can't lose sight of that fact that, when we talk about things like access management, it's access to the data. These applications only get you to the data, and that needs to be secured as well. All right, here we go again. Okay, right? Next slide, right?
Yeah. So
go ahead.
I'll just jump in here, Alan. So I think obviously we've said everything fundamentally changes for IT, but there are factors that are new that IT can't control anymore. So I think there's easy ones, like it's now an uncontrolled environment. You don't walk into an office that's controlled by, the physical security, and you have your network security in there. This is all the Wild West. I mean, it's someone's home, it's someone's second home, it's, a coffee shop, it's, a remote place, it could be an Airbnb. It doesn't, you're anywhere in the world. So that remote environment is out of their control. I think another thing is now you have people with varying degrees of tech savviness, if you will, that have shown up, and, originally they were in the office, they were in a controlled kind of workflow, and they were able to be trained and they were able to function. And now they're at home and they've got to worry about, like, how do they log into a VPN? And these people may have never, figured out how do they log into a VPN. They may be working on services that they never knew how to use. So those are all things that they've got to account for. I know that we've had, the sticky note on your monitor for your password, that's existed forever. But how many of those insecure workarounds are going to be there because you're at home now and there's nobody watching over you, in a sense, and there's procedures and processes that are in place, and people are smart. They're going to say, hey, this is hard. I don't want to take all these steps, so I'm going to find a clever workaround. And that clever workaround could be more insecure. I think there's also the legacy corporate mindset. So, we've seen this in a lot of recent articles where people are like, well, we really do want to let people be remote, but, we've got this concern that really is a legacy concern, which is, are people working? Are they not working? Right? So you've got that sort of corporate mindset from a lot of executives. And how does that change? That's, again, out of IT's control. And then, of course, the simple one, which is the attack surface just exponentially increased, right? So, IT doesn't control all the routers, they don't control all the switches, they don't control the internet, they don't control like 10 different things that are now involved. They don't control who the family members are that are around there. They don't control whether they're using a home laptop or a corporate laptop. This is a fundamentally different world for IT, I think.
I wonder if we're going to go through a progression like we did with our technology going to the cloud. We lift and shift applications to the cloud, we flip things to remote, and then we start working on these kind of more smaller, componentized, more flexible software architectures. Now we do the same thing for how we work and how work gets done, the modules of work. And so I think maybe, not to go too far with the analogy, but there may be some kind of lessons learned there that might apply to how we work as well as the technology.
In an interesting way, Mitchell, this is like, it's really incredible fertile ground for all kinds of innovation, new new ways of thinking, new applications, new solutions, new methodologies. So, I mean, all this stuff is going to happen over the next, few years, if not longer, and it's pretty incredible in a lot of ways too.
Agree. But I think you're right about rethinking the security model too. It's like you have to rethink security when you go to the cloud. And now, it isn't just about your corporate laptop. But still, the device plays a huge role, whether it's an iPad or a laptop, and that's now part of the
device is your gateway to everything, right? I mean, it's the gateway to getting to everything. So yeah, absolutely, it plays a key role. I think we're going to hit this in another slide coming up, but it's not the only part anymore. I mean, we know this, that identities and identity compromises are the #1 way that people get hacked and breached. So it's, that's a core part of the equation now too.
Mm-hmm.
You're just trying to stay on top of the audience here, guys. Another point brought up by Daniel in the audience, the question was, this is all fine and dandy, but so now you have non-company owned assets accessing the network. That may need security software on those assets. This is over broadband that I normally maybe wouldn't have as big a pipe at home, but I need it to do my Zoom meetings and everything I'm doing. I need to back up these devices. And these are not corporate owned assets. So you don't want me backing up my device to the corporate backup, let's say. My laptop breaks, I got to get it fixed. I need a new laptop. Who pays for this, right? Is that because traditionally, remember, you need a new laptop, go to the IT. We used to go to Jake and he'd order a new laptop from IBM or Lenovo. And
Jake from State Farm. Yeah, different.
Right, not Jake from State Farm, no. But and then that was it. You got your laptop. Well, those days are gone, right? So,
now IT wants to drop ship them to you. You're not going to come in. They're going to get drop shipped to you. You're going to pop it open and everything's going to work. I mean, that is a core part of, at least JumpCloud's vision of what's going to happen around IT, is that when you onboard somebody, you're going to just send them a laptop and it's going to show up and boom, you just flip it open. Your identity is going to be on it. It's going to download all your software. It's going to configure it properly. It's going to secure it, and away you go. And IT never touched it. So that's where absolutely the future of that is going to be. But to answer Daniel's question a little bit more directly, I think that's all TBD. I think there are going to be absolutely cost shifting going on. I don't think organizations are going to save any money, to be honest with you. I think it's going to go from, they may have spent that money in an office. They're just going to hand that to an employee for, whatever they need to purchase on that front. So I think it ends up being sort of just shifting it from one side to the other. But I do think that if people are going to be working remotely, then obviously the organization is going to have to figure out, what do they cover in terms of costs and what do they not cover? What are those expenses from home? But I think you'll see lots of people figure that out pretty fast. I don't think that that's going to be an impediment to having remote work happen, that's for sure.
I agree.
I'm going to jump to the next slide. We have a bunch more questions from the audience, but I'll try to work them in as we kind of move along here. Okay, so let's talk about a traditional approach to security, and that actually gets to one of the questions we got from Robert. It was more of a comment, but Raj, you want to take first crack at the slide here?
Well, I think this was a great one for the three of us because we live this. So this was our security model over the last 15, 20 years. When we started Still Secure back in 2000, it was really about network security. That is where the world was going. It wasn't even that much about device security at that point. It was, let's protect that moat, because we know once you get into the moat, inside the moat, you're actually safe. And so we built network security solutions. That's what we did at Still Secure. And then from there, you started to realize, well, geez, there's going to be some different types of access methods. So the device is going to be important. We've got some people that are mobile. Well, there's a lot more threats on those devices. We have Mac, we have Linux. So we've got to make sure that gets locked down. So that became a factor. Then Alan, you and I were talking about this earlier today. AppSec became a huge part of the industry too. But all of these approaches were sort of the old approaches, right? And now we've got this sort of new normal and what's going to happen now. But this to me is sort of if you ask somebody a few years ago, what's their approach to security? I think this is the answer. Well, I'm going to lock down the device. I'm going to make sure the network's secure. I'm going to make sure we've got app control, and we're kind of done. And that's the extent of it. But
the old layer approach, right, Rod?
The old layer approach, right? Like we used to talk about that a lot. But I don't think that that's going to be what the future is going to be.
Yeah, now, I mean, one of, just to drive that home, one of our, Ashish asked about, we can't, or he comments, we can't control the behavior or context of the employee working remote. If you're in an office network, you can monitor, right? And you monitor where you're going, what you've accessed and stuff like that. But at remote locations, you have much less control. I think there's two pieces of that. One is a technology answer and one is a cultural answer. I personally feel as the CEO here, and all three of us are CEOs, as the CEO at MediaOps, if I got to hire people where I got to worry about where they're going remotely and stuff with their devices, and that's going to be a danger to my data, I don't really want those people working here. I'm not here to be a babysitter. I think, yes, we need to protect ourselves, and you never know, what's going on in someone's brain or on their computer. But we need to, I think part of having remote workers is trusting them to be adults.
I think there's a couple of things here to Ashish's question, Alan. I think one of them is that there are tools and technology where you can have some semblance of security for your organization. So for instance, very simplistic things, right? We want to make sure that the device that you're using to do your work is your corporate device. We don't want you using a personal device. That's a pretty standard thing. And maybe another piece is we want you to VPN into our home office, and then that's the way you get access to, let's say, AWS. We've IP restricted it, or to Azure or something like that. And that way we know that, we've now got a couple layers of authentication to make sure you really are who you say you are. I think the other thing that's missed here is, people have gotten really savvy over the last few years about their privacy, about their own data. And we see this all the time. People don't want to do their personal work on a work laptop. They don't want the company to even have a chance to look at it. So, and most everybody does have a computer at home. And so they're able to do their personal work on their personal machine and corporate work on their corporate machine. And I think that that's another part of the equation too, which is the end users are not open to having their data even accessible by an organization, nor should they. I mean, that should be their private data and their private information.
I think, quite frankly, end users resent being monitored,
100%.
right? 100%. They don't want to be monitored. Yeah. I'm not, I don't need Big Brother watching me through my laptop camera here that,
Absolutely not.
So it's definitely part of it. Let's jump to the next slide if it's okay, guys. So we need a new approach to IT and to securing it. So the new domain model is domainless, right? And that's kind of something that, I heard for the first time from the JumpCloud team. And, even though it takes me back when I watch this slide and I think about it, to Mitchell, you and I being at the RSA conference, 2006 maybe, and we go to a session about remember the Jericho initiative? Mm-hmm. Micro-perimeterization, get rid of the perimeter. There is no perimeter, long live the perimeter. And really what they were talking about was being user-centric in your perimeter. And Mitch, your camera's kind of blurring up.
Okay, I'm getting a report here. It's having a little problem, so I may turn off for a minute.
But anyway, so we lose. It's a user-centric model of security in IT. Raj, it's a JumpCloud sort of thought. Why don't you explain it?
Absolutely. I think the way we think about it is you work from the user out, if you will. So start with the user at the center and make sure that that person is really who they say they are. when they access that device. That device then is secured. Then the network transport is secured. And then you finally have access as appropriate to the target IT resource, whether that's a file, application, whatever it may be. So, but I think it starts from the user and it works outward versus where we were, 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, when it was the network was really sort of the central thing that we worried about, the domain, if you will. And now that's not the way the world works. And we also know where security risks are virtually exclusively with the user. I mean, obviously there's other security risks too, but the fastest path for hackers has really become just compromising the right identities. And once you've done that, you've bypassed every type of security technology that you've put in place virtually.
It's human element. That's the easiest place to break in. Raj, I'm thinking about this domainless model. Maybe what we need to, and this is something that I actually implemented about 3.5 years ago at a company, because everybody traveled at that company. But we moved to a work anywhere strategy. There is you don't design anything for the best version of it is in the office. Like, the conferencing system is magnificent, but if you're on the road, it's terrible, right? We built it all so that we tried to have the best experience for everyone. Now, I would do that again differently in today's scenario, but nothing is about location, right? You cannot guarantee anything about location. So it's anywhere, wherever anybody is. Them are traveling to go see grandparents on the weekend and work at their house on Monday. And just like you have, it's the same thing with the domain, right? It's not about the domain sitting back in the data center at the office, because there is no office. Or we've moved to the cloud already. We've already put that as a service and gone that direction.
And I think, Mitchell, it's not just location. I mean, that's one important part where you've basically said work from anywhere. I think it's work on anything, with any type of vendor, provider, protocol. I mean, it's basically neutralizing all those things and saying, hey, use whatever's best, do whatever is best. Now, obviously, this goes back to the earlier part of the conversation. There will be some guardrails and there will be some fundamental principles, but outside of those, IT is going to enable the workforce to use whatever is best for them to get their job done. And I think location is absolutely a part of that. I feel like working from the beach for the next 2 weeks, and that's where I'm going to be most productive for the next 2 weeks. Well, you now have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. I think a good way of thinking about this, and it's not necessarily what JumpCloud does, but in my mind, is what we need is, let's call it a proxy that sits between the user, right, wherever he or she may be, and assets. Those assets may be data, they may be cloud-based applications, they may be other users that they interact with or what have you, right? But this domainless model relies on a broker or a proxy that, remember
I wouldn't use the word proxy,
firewall?
Alan. I think broker is probably the right word, right? It's basically what JumpCloud does. We're the broker of, who has access to what. Now, I don't think you want a proxy between everything, because you don't want to funnel into one spot, right? You want to let everything go point to point, which is probably a lot more viable. And then ultimately, as long as you can secure those point-to-point connections every time, it should actually have more security as well, because the proxy could be sort of that one place where people could target or attack, as well as one bottleneck if something were to happen. So I think that's actually one of the differences between our vision of what domainless enterprise is and sort of the traditional view of zero trust security, where zero trust does have sort of a bottleneck. We've said, no, we don't really think that that's what the future is. We think it's much more of a point-to-point type of communication. Every transaction is an atomic transaction. It's verified in all the different ways, and there's trust built throughout that process. So slightly different, Alan, but that's generally, I think, what we're thinking about what the domainless enterprise vision is.
Yeah, I'm going to go to the next slide if it's okay, guys.
Mm-hmm.
So here's
we just talked about it.
Here's the Enterprise, domainless enterprise defined.
Yeah.
So it is perimeter less. It's not micro perimeter necessarily, right? We're not, because I think that's a losing proposition in this model, where you don't know where and what they're using and how they're getting on it. So there's you have to take a different approach to just redefining the perimeter, right?
Yeah.
There
One
is
thing, Alan, I didn't put on there, but in that perimeter list is that it's also, in our opinion, there shouldn't be an access gateway. It shouldn't be sort of funneled into one spot. So that's not on the slide, but I think that's a core part of the vision of domainless enterprise, that it is a point to point.
I think to that
point,
I'm sorry, Mitch?
No, I was going to say, to that point, you think about all the variations applications are deployed, where they live, where they run, whether it's something on your smartphone, it's a SaaS application, it's a corporate app that you built, it's some custom implementation of, a SaaS app, some kind of application, SAP or something like that. You kind of have to support every model. So you can't have one security profile about how you implement security across all of those environments. You have to have a strategy where you can accommodate a Dropbox and a Microsoft file server through Office 365 or your own or whatever you're doing. That has to be your security strategy, not I only support these things in this lane and that's it. I mean, that's the world we're in.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And I think sort of the next layer of that conversation is trust is enforced at all layers, right? I talked a little bit about every step of the way, and I know there's a question or a comment around, doesn't MFA become a very important tool in this? Of course, absolutely. MFA is incredibly important to verify that the user is who they say they are. Biometrics is going to be incredibly important. Certificates are going to be very important. I mean, these are all tools that we're going to use to verify the identity and verify that the device is compliant or it's safe. I mean, remember when we were talking about NAC, when we sort of invented that category way back when, Mitchell, when you announced it, that's a core part of what's happening these days, right? People are going to want to make sure that that system is clean, it's verified, it's corporate owned, all those things. Those are going to be a part of that atomic transaction in a domainless world.
Yeah. I'm going to move on, guys. So let's compare domain versus domainless, perimeter versus a dynamic security model. Raj?
Sure, I think we've hit a lot of these points. Obviously, the domain that we used to live in 15, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, on-prem, Windows-based, everything was sort of the moat, was inside the moat. And if you were outside the moat, you were basically VPNing in. And we spent a ton of time on perimeter security. So the IDS, IPSs of the world, the next-gen firewalls, all these things were a core part of making sure that this internal area was safe. And it was really sort of, I'd say, a proxy for the physical building that we had, right? I mean, it's basically the domain was the building in a sense. But with the building gone, with nobody in it, no services in it, it doesn't even make sense to have a domain anymore. So you go cloud-based, you're going to be OS agnostic, right? It's going to be multi-protocol, platform independent, those kinds of things. You're going to make sure that every single time somebody logs in, they are who they say they are, and we're going to check that and verify that continuously. And you're going to have security embedded at each layer. And ultimately, I also think, not on this slide, but I think it's going to be much less friction for end users. I think you are going to see things like passwordless access, biometrics, those kinds of things go through the process. And a user, this goes back to the sort of inversely proportional relationship. When Mitchell, you and I and Alan were creating Stillscare, we used to talk about this all the time, where if we added more security, the end user experience went down. Well, that's not going to happen anymore. Like, we figured out ways where we can have a great experience, a passwordless experience, for instance, and yet we can still maintain a very, very high level of security. So those things, I think we're going to continue to innovate on those things, and they're going to happen. And that's going to just make it much easier for IT organizations to effectively implement these solutions, build a secure organization, but actually hand their end users the opportunity to be much more productive in this remote work world.
You know, Raj, I'm thinking about your chart here, wondering if you agree with this. One of the big differences from domain to domainless, I think, is you're relying entirely upon APIs and standards and open source ways of intercommunicating between systems, whether it's for authentication or whatever it might be, as opposed to product features that we might have had in a Microsoft, domain world or something like that. Because to provide that OS agnostic, I mean, I'm not saying there isn't a product behind it. There is, but in the world today that's so different than what we had to work with back then. I mean, you have an OAuth approach to the directory. That wasn't there. You might have one interface to the directory to interchange directory information, but we have a much different environment. So the climate to do this is possible now, I guess is my point.
I 100% agree. I mean, I think protocols are what are going to enable this, APIs, those kinds of things. And look, I think JumpCloud is absolutely going to be a player in this market, but so are other people. And customers and organizations out there should have choice. And it shouldn't just be, well, there's one provider and therefore that's all we can do. I think there is going to be choice, and there's going to be a lot of innovation from a lot of different people. And that's going to occur off of some platform. And that platform is going to be open source APIs. It's going to be open source protocols that have been ratified. Those are the types of things that are going to enable us to go build this domainless enterprise.
As I need to move to the next slide to keep us moving here.
We're not too much time. It's going quite.
We're having too much fun.
Well, we only have another 8 or 10 slides. No big deal.
I'm pretty sure we don't.
All right, this is a big slide though, Raj, and I wanted to make sure we hit it, right? Because this kind of is a great representation of the new normal that we may find ourselves in, whether it's 2 months, 6 months, or a year from now. Talk to it.
Absolutely. So JumpCloud's building basically an access control and device management platform. So it is going to be a core part of a domainless enterprise. It sits in the cloud, and we are basically enabling IT organizations to connect their users safely to whatever it may be, whether that's a system, it's a server, it's an application, it could be data on files, it could be any of those different things. And then we're going to make sure that that transaction is secure the whole way along, whether that user is who they say they are, that device is secured, that transport is the right transport, and then the authorization that you have on that target IT resource is proper. So that's really what JumpCloud's trying to do. We're trying to be this platform to enable organizations to become domainless, to secure their infrastructure, regardless of where it may be, and their users, and basically help folks get work done.
Raj, I think that was a great quick description of this, but I'd like to.
Sure.
I'd like to, ask our viewers and listeners really take a good look at this slide. Really understand how it all kind of fits in here, right? Via single sign-on into these, SaaS-based apps, if you will.
It could be any web application, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. How are you getting onto your laptops? How are you accessing cloud, maybe internal applications hosted in the cloud, or maybe you're a developer working directly on AWS instances in the cloud. You using Apple devices, whether it's a Mac or iPhones or what have you, and you still have. Let's not look. No one's going to throw away their radius authentications, and there still will be, at least I don't see it going away in the next 5 years. They're not going to throw Wi-Fi access points and that kind of internal
or
corporate,
VPNs for that matter, Alan.
Right.
VPNs
they may not buy more licenses, and we don't need any more concentrators, thanks. But I'm not going to throw out necessarily what I have. We'll end of life them eventually. So, this all kind of fits in holistically, right? As what this new domainless enterprise looks like. Why I love these webinars, Raj, is our audience cuts right to the chase, though. So we have a question here. So how do you provision in a domainless enterprise? How do you provision?
Well, I mean, obviously, not to be super self-serving, but the core part of it is a cloud directory service. So a core part of domainless enterprise is connecting people to what they need to access, and that starts with identities. And so whether you use JumpCloud or somebody else, that's going to be a core part of the platform. And then from there, there's all kinds of other aspects. So the device and making sure that that's secured and is clean so that people can access whatever they need to access. And then it's making sure that the internet connections and the transport is secure too. So making sure that when people access, they're accessing it through the VPN or through SSL or whatever it may be to make sure that it's secure. So the way you provision is you start with a cloud directory and then you work your way out from that, because that's where the user lives, the identity lives. And like we said a couple of slides ago, you start with the user, then you go to the device, then you go to network transport, then you go to the target IT resources that you're trying to access. So that's probably the quickest way to go implement a domainless enterprise. And if you have questions on that, we have a ton of material on our site, jumpcloud.com, where we go through the architecture of domainless enterprise. We go through the steps to implement it. We go through reference architectures and white papers and things like that. And obviously we have solutions engineers that would be happy to speak with folks too if you're trying to implement it.
I'm
going to jump to the next. Oh, sorry, Mitchell, go ahead.
No, I was just going to real quick, I want to tie something together for what Raj has been talking about. If you take everything on this diagram and go one step further, what do you have? The end user, the person, right? So it is about the person and it is about identity. And you think about what I was talking about, turn the system upside down or 180 degrees. You know, this idea of a domain controller inside the enterprise, I'm not saying they're all going away, but why control everything from your data center when you can manage everything? You need to take a management approach where you're going to be connecting to everything, right? And do you want to maintain the system? And I'm not just, being a shill for you, Raj, I really believe this. Do you want to be the person that's maintaining that capability, or do you want to leverage it and be focused on users and their identity and devices and their identity as well?
And users getting the resources they need. That's what it's about.
All they care about. They care about convenience. That's what they're interested in.
They want to get their job done. I mean, our tagline is make work happen, right? And we changed it to make remote work happen. So that's what people are looking to do.
Yeah.
Guys, we're running low on time, and we've got some great questions. I don't know if we don't get to your questions online here, we'll get to them in email. But Raj, Cloud Directory Service, tell us.
This was the answer to the question previously, Alan, right? So how do you get started? You get started with a Cloud Directory Service, and then we build off of that. So I'll let you keep going, but I think we hit most of that. And I think we had one slide before.
I keep hitting it when I move. Key takeaways that we want us to go home with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll hit this really quickly. Remote work is absolutely the new model. I think it will be the model of the future. Obviously, there are going to be some things that have to be done in person, but if there's a chance that it can be done remote, I believe that we are moving to that environment. I think the traditional domain model for IT is not going to work anymore. I think everybody probably knows that or has learned that in the last few months, that there is a step function change coming in how IT gets delivered. And our viewpoint is it's going to be the domainless enterprise, and that domainless enterprise starts with a different foundation. It starts from the user first and it works out. So I think that's the key takeaways I would say walk away with coming out of this webinar.
Mitchell?
The polarity of work has shifted from negative to positive. That's the world we in. I think
the magnetic field of the earth has turned around. Guys, we're not going to have enough time to hit these questions, but I promise you we'll, Raj, we're going to get these over to JumpCloud and we can.
Yeah, we'll answer them for sure. There's a lot of great questions. I'd love to make sure our team engages
especially
with folks.
The first one, there's no name, but it gets to really how JumpCloud works with single sign-on, access control radius, etc. Just real quickly, we do have 4 Amazon winners today, as we always give out Amazon gift cards here. So we have Jeff A, Catherine P, Daniel W, and Vince W. we'll be in contact with you. You won an Amazon gift card. Congratulations. Raj, Mitchell, I feel like there's so many still secure people. We could have John Curry here.
You know what? We're meeting at Old Chicago and having a beer again.
Exactly. Good stuff, man. But
yeah,
it's about the domainless enterprise and what the new normal is going to be and how we could secure it. And not only like a patchwork security, but it actually can be a better security than what we've had in the past, right? And that, you know what? That's optimistic, right? That's being the optimist in this glass half full, is that, hey, we're going to do things this way. We have a new normal, but here's the good news. We can make it work for us. And with things like JumpCloud's Domainless Enterprise, it's possible. Raj, thank you. Thank JumpCloud for sponsoring.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Mitchell. Great to see you guys.
Mitchell, thank you for joining in here. And I know originally you were going to stand in. I was supposed to be actually taking my son to college, but it's been delayed. But keep up the great work at Accelerated Strategies Group.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. This is Alan Shimel from MediaOps, DevOps.com. Thanks for joining us on this webinar. Whether you're watching it live or on demand, we hope you've enjoyed it and hope to see you soon on another MediaOps webinar real soon. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care.